Hi, this is Eric from longboxreview.wordpress.com. Welcome to a special episode of the Longbox Review podcast. Some time ago, the host of the Heroes and Villains podcast, Bruce Leslie, invited me onto his show to discuss one of my very favorite characters in comics, and that would be Dick Grayson. Since Bruce and I will be getting together again soon to discuss another hero, I asked him if I could rebroadcast his episode on my show, and Bruce graciously agreed. I want to thank Bruce for allowing me to do this and to thank him for inviting me onto his show. You can check out other episodes of the Heroes and Villains podcast by going to heroesandvillains.libsyn.com. I'll provide a link in the show notes. If you have any comments about this discussion, please send email to longboxreview@gmail.com or to Bruce at laundryroombruce@gmail.com. You can also leave voicemail at 208-953-1841. Finally, don't forget to rate and review both of our shows in iTunes. So please enjoy this rebroadcast of the Heroes and Villains episode featuring Dick Grayson. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to Heroes and Villains with Bruce Leslie. Superheroes and villains, and each week I take an in-depth look at one hero, or occasionally a villain, from comic strips, radio plays, comic books, cartoons, television shows, or movies. To be honest, it's usually a combination of those. But regardless of the source material, I want to intrigue you. Well, welcome to episode 21 of Heroes and Villains, and today I'm joined by yet another very special guest, and this is a first-time guest for me. This is Mr. Eric Isaacson from the Longbox Review, which is a great comic book podcast. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
All right. Thank you, Bruce. First of all, I just want to say thank you for having me on the show. Let's see. The Longbox Review podcast is just a little podcast I started a few years ago, where I just talk comics and the news. I talk specific comics, stuff I love and stuff I'm reading currently. And sometimes I bring on special guests myself to just talk comics. So that's what it's about, just talking comics.
And you have sort of a semi-occasional guest host, is that right?
That's correct. Travis, yes.
And one thing I really like about your show is that you don't have sort of a specific topic that you're locked in on. You cover a wide range of topics, so you're going to get different things on different episodes, and it's worth listening to all of them. And, just as an example, your most recent episode, you did some comic reviews, but you did comic reviews of things that I could actually appreciate those reviews on because they weren't comics that I had read or weren't that familiar with. I think you talked about The Answer, whom I wish I had mentioned on my question episode, but I didn't. And then you also went into, was it Boys Club? There was a team sort of comic that you talked about?
Danger Club, yes.
Danger Club, I'm sorry. Wow, Boys Club. There were teenagers, though, so I was close.
Yes.
And also just want to let people know that they can find you easily at your website, which is longboxreview.wordpress.com. Anything else you want to mention?
Let's see. That the website's correct. I also have started recently doing YouTube reviews and just general video stuff related to the Longbox Review podcast. And so you can search YouTube for Longbox Review, all one word, and you should be able to find me there.
And I've seen links to your YouTube stuff on your website too, so that's one way to get there. And you're on
That's
Twitter.
Correct.
You're on Twitter also, correct?
That's right, Longbox Review.
All right, and that's a great Twitter feed to follow. But the reason that Eric is joining me today is that we're going to discuss a hero, of course, and today's hero is Richard Dick Grayson, the first Robin, best known as Nightwing, and also known as the third Batman. He was created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, with illustrator Jerry Robinson contributing, and he first appeared in Detective Comics number 38 in April 1940. And I would like to point out that Batman was not in Detective Comics number 1, so there weren't 38 episodes of Batman without Robin. He actually came within the first 12 episodes of Batman's appearance. And now, as far as Nightwing is concerned, the Nightwing persona was created by Marv Wolfman, who later sort of became the editor-in-chief at DC. And the artist involved was George Perez, who we should all be familiar with. He's still working today. and he first appeared in Tales of the Teen Titans number 44 in July 1984. The first thing I like to talk about is my personal experience with the character of the week. And since I have a guest this week, I always make a tradition of letting the guest go first, of telling me the who, the where, the hi, and the how of Dick Grayson. So go ahead.
All right. Wow. That's a tall order, Bruce. Let's see. My personal experience with Dick Grayson, of course, started with him as Robin. And more specifically, since you mentioned Marv Wolfman and George Perez, their work on the new Teen Titans is really what drew me into that character. Despite the fact that I knew of Dick Grayson as Robin in other media and other things I'd read when I was younger.
Yes.
But it was definitely in the new Teen Titans that where basically I fell in love with the character. And it didn't matter that he was Robin or Nightwing or Batman or whatever persona he happened to be inhabiting at the time. It was that character of Dick Grayson that I really, really enjoyed and loved to read over the years.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
All right. So I was just going to follow up with, and the reason why that was where I fell in love with the character in New Teen Titans was that at that time, he was, I think he was kind of portrayed as about, maybe 17, 18 years old, maybe 19 at most at that time. And when I was reading it, I believe I was about 14, 15 years old. And so, even though there was a few years difference there in the characters, I really identified with Dick Grayson and what he was going through in terms of coming to grips with being his own man, coming out of the Batman shadow. What teenager hasn't, especially teenage boy, I think, hasn't dealt with that kind of growing up and moving out on your own and doing things on your own, and maybe even coming out of the shadow of your father figure as well. So,
that's absolutely a beautiful description. But my own personal experience with Dick Grayson, the man who would become Nightwing, really starts first and foremost with Batman 1966. That old series, I used to watch reruns on Ted Turner's TBS station that we had as one of the 6 channels I could watch growing up. And that's one of the gateways to superhero fandom for me, was that old show, as campy as it may be. And I did enjoy Burt Ward's portrayal of Dick Grayson, at least as a child. And then also around that same time, I'm familiar with the Super Friends, in which Robin and Batman sort of served the role of one character. Every episode would have sort of missions where 2 characters would team up, but if Batman and Robin were together, they only counted as one character. And though they don't explicitly say that that's Dick Grayson, I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that that is Dick Grayson in the Super Friends. And as far as the Nightwing persona, the new Teen Titans, just like you said, it came around at about the right time to sort of serve as DC's counterpoint to the X-Men, who were really, really growing in popularity among younger readers at that time, or at least adolescent readers. And it was just sort of a counterpoint, and that's when I realized that Robin actually could grow up, and he had to have an adult life, or at least a young adult life. And that's really my personal experience with Dick Grayson, and more specifically with Nightwing. Now, next is the section that we discuss the physical appearance of our character, and I'm going to start off with the easy part, Eric, and I'm going to let you pick up the hard part. So I'm going to just mention that he's a human male, Caucasian with black hair, blue to black eyes, sometimes depicted as gray eyes. He's in his early to mid-20s, depending on the era of DC Comics. He is described most commonly as about 5 feet, 10 inches tall, and he's also right around 175 pounds. I'm going to let you tell us about some of the different incarnations of the Nightwing costume.
All right, let's see. Let's start, if you don't mind, Bruce. Let's start with the more recent incarnation.
Yes.
Let's see the Nightwing of the New 52 universe in DC. So basically, it's I'd say it's a mostly black bodysuit that's kind of segmented into armor-like sections. He's got knee pads and whatnot, and he has
I think it's fair to point out probably less body armor than some of the other DC characters in this new body armor trend.
That is true. Yeah. In fact, I was trying to figure out how to really describe it, because it doesn't quite look like body armor, but it is segmented as if it has it just has different segments. So I presume it's to help protect him more, or at least give that impression visually. So,
Yes.
and then also they went with the red kind of bird-like symbol on his chest, with red piping down his arms as well.
And I think that red motif is a pretty big departure from the more classical images that we have of Nightwing. I mean, I always think of Nightwing as blue on black rather than red on black.
That's correct, and it was quite a departure. But I actually did enjoy this departure because it does call back to when Dick Grayson was Robin with that red vest. So I thought that was a nice change.
I hadn't even thought of that, but that's an excellent thing to point out.
And let's see, next going back in time, like you mentioned, Bruce, the blue aspect of Nightwing. So that's where we get in the mid 90s, where Nightwing has his own series. He again has the black bodysuit, but then he has the blue color going down his arms and into his gloves, but also has kind of it's more like a V shape, but it gives you the kind of the sense of wings on his chest.
And I thought it was a really nice touch that when it extends to his fingers, it goes to his middle finger and his ring finger, but not to his thumb, index, and pinky. I mean, it really has a very nice visual appearance against the night sky. Sometimes when you see that, it makes him almost appear inhuman. And with the blue motif, I think there were some, at least in the animated world, some depictions of Nightwing with just sort of a blue bird-like emblem on his chest, and he didn't have the things going up on his shoulders and down his arms.
That is correct, yes. In the animated series, yeah, that's true.
And pretty much every depiction, he has this stylized domino mask held on with the paste or whatever they call the stuff, gum paste or the sort of thing, so you don't have to have a strap on it. And most of them at least attempt to not just be your straight-up domino mask. They try to put some wings on it. They try to give it something that either harkens back to the Bat family or to the sort of bird motif that Nightwing has.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'm going to ask you if you would mind telling us a little bit about the disco collar era costume that Nightwing wore in the beginning, which some people, you either love it or you hate it. There's not much in between. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Let's see. So this costume first appeared in that Tales of the Teen Titans issue number 44, and so we still have the blue motif, but it's more prominent in the later versions of Nightwing's costume, in that he has blue gloves, blue boots. Bruce, I don't know. You tell me. I think the darker parts of the costume, it's supposed to come across as a dark blue, maybe black. I can think it maybe depends on the artist.
I mean, I've looked, and it's not just the artist. It's also maybe the print quality and the different variables go into it. But I really don't think it's black. It's like the original Black Canary wasn't actually black, and I think that might have something to do with the printing process back in those days more than the artist's intention.
Yeah. And also it had so the lighter blue aspects of the costume. You kind of get a V shape going through the middle of his chest, and then collects it at the belt area. But then you get that, as you said, the disco collar. But I would agree with that depiction too, for the most part. But think back to what Dick Grayson's origin is. He's a circus performer. So if you look at some circus outfits. Yeah.
I turned my video off, so how did you see my notes? That's what I was saving for myself, was that I liked it because it's a callback to circus attire, so it's so perfect. I love it when we're on the same page. Yeah. Go ahead and continue with the circus attire.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder there.
I love it. I love it when that happens.
Okay, so you got that flared collar look, and like I said, I think it harkens back to his circus days. So you get that nice blending of his background and how it affected him and why he chose that look at that time. But then you also have off his shoulders and coming into his chest are these little gold wing-like effects as well. So you get the wing aspect of Nightwing.
And I think that's really clear, like you said before, that you like the red motif because it harkened back to Robin, but I think these gold leaves remind us that despite his blue on dark blue motif, or perhaps blue on black, he is not a bat. He's still a bird. He's just a night bird.
Yeah.
And I think that's my favorite thing from that disco collar era that was abandoned. And I mean, I love the look of all the costumes, but I just like the feathers. I mean, that little bit of homage to remind us that he remembers where he started.
That's right.
Now, the next section is the section where I like to discuss the powers and the abilities of the character that we're talking about. And if it's okay with you, I'll go ahead and start off by saying that he has a background as an acrobat performing in the circus, which we already mentioned. And he has been described by some sources as the greatest human acrobat in the DC universe. He has, as many of the non-superpowered heroes in any comic book universe, they're often depicted as being of peak athletic fitness, peak athletic strength. They have this great endurance, and of course Dick Grayson possesses all of those. He's very, very skilled at martial arts. He's not quite as good as Batman, but he's almost there. Well, I shouldn't say he's not quite as good as Batman. He's not quite as good as Bruce Wayne, but he's almost there.
Yes.
And his martial art of choice is Eskrima, which is a martial art that originates in the Philippines, and they love to do stick fighting. Do you want to comment on that?
Only that as a reader that has followed Dick Grayson through the years since about 1982, the choice of Eskrima sticks seems to come out of nowhere when they did the Nightwing series in the mid 90s. But I like it. I like the aspect. I like the fact that he has these Eskrima sticks and he uses them in the way that he does.
Cool. And I was trying to set you up to mention those twin Eskrima sticks that he always carries, and they're made from some undefined, unbreakable polymer. But those are sort of his iconic weapons, at least over the past 20 years, as you said. Also, he was rigorously trained by Bruce Wayne, so that means he knows pretty much everything that you could expect a superhero to know. He understands how to escape from tight spots. He understands how to dive into a criminal's mind. He's very good at fencing. He's very strong. He's a master of disguise, all of those things that you would imagine going along with being Batman's first and perhaps favorite trainee. He carries some modified batarangs, and they do sort of the same thing that batarangs do, but maybe he doesn't use them as often as Bruce Wayne would. And he carries jump lines with these gas capsules and gas cartridges, sort of your standard Wayne technology gear. One thing that's sort of, I won't say unique, but close to unique about Dick Grayson is that he fluently speaks lots of languages due to his circus life. He met people from many different countries. He grew up in what you would call sort of an international microcosm, where he had to pick up all these language skills. So he's been described as being fluent in English, Romanian, and by the way, for those of you who don't know, he is of Romanian descent, apparently. He speaks French, Spanish, Russian, Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese. He speaks an alien language known as Tamaran, and he's also skilled in American Sign Language. So I don't know that I've covered a hero or villain yet that has multilingual skills on that level. And he's been shown to be a brilliant and experienced strategist, particularly leading the Titans in their various forms, whether they're Teen Titans, New Teen Titans, or Titans. But he's the one who always rises into the leadership role when he's on the team. As a result of that, he's a master at rallying people together, unifying them for a common cause. He inspires people when they think they can't go on anymore. He's has all the leadership skills of Batman without the strong level of psychopathology. So I think that works in his favor. And just wanted to mention that there's some technology involved in the Nightwing costume. It's made of some fire-resistant, triple-weave Kevlar type stuff, and it's bulletproof, it's fireproof. But, if I were him, I would cover my face up. I don't want to get shot in the head. But he chooses not to. Any other things you'd like to comment on about the powers before we move on to weaknesses?
No, I think you pretty well covered it there, Bruce.
And he's charismatic, and I guess that's just another way of saying that he's a great leader. But people just, even dark people like Dick Grayson, and we'll talk more about that later. I'm going to discuss his weaknesses, and not a whole lot to say. He's a mortal human, so anytime I discuss the mortal humans, their first weakness is they could be killed by a sharp stick if you manage to get the right opportunity. I would say the fact that he's a little more on the wholesome and happy side is a weakness for him, particularly when he tried to wear the cowl. Do you want to comment on that?
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. The upbeatness almost got him killed early on when he took on the Batman role, because I can't remember the villain now, but one of the villains realized that was not the Batman, at least that he knew, because Dick Grayson often would go into battle with Damian Wayne as Robin at that time,
Yes.
With a smile on his face.
Exactly. That's what I was hoping you would point out. And I'm not sure if it was the Riddler or Two-Face. It was one of those two. But there was a security camera, and he just focuses a little closer, a little closer, a little closer, one frame, one panel at a time on the page. And then eventually he looks and he goes, this person is smiling. Batman never smiles.
Yes, Batman never smiles. And I want to just, if you don't mind, I'd like to add too.
Go ahead.
As it's sort of tied to what you said about Dick Grayson so far, but as a weakness, I guess, and it is a weakness in one sense, but I think it makes him a stronger character, a stronger person. But it's the fact that Dick Grayson has a big heart. He cares a lot about many people in his life, which obviously can be detrimental because he's too worried about them to focus on taking care of the bad guys or whatever. I mean, he can get hurt himself emotionally. So, and that was something that I think Bruce Wayne probably doesn't have to worry about as much.
And the big heart, the trusting nature was really portrayed well in the Young Justice version of Dick Grayson, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the show.
Okay.
But it's time for us to take a break, so everybody, we will return to Heroes and Villains, episode 21, with my guest, Eric Isaacson, after this break. Hey everybody, I've just had a long weekend at the Heroes Con. That's the comic book convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, sort of my home away from home. And it's just been a wonderful long weekend. I'm tired after spending a couple of days there, some of the time with my family, some of the time by myself. It was a wonderful convention this year. We had a lot of great folks that were here. We had Greg Rucka, Matt Fraction, Jonathan Hickman, Amanda Connor, Becky Cloonan, Neil Adams, Frank Cho, Sean Murphy, Robert Vendetti. That's just to name a few. And, of course, we also happen to have a good friend of the show there, our own Rachel Pandich, which you've heard on a couple of episodes. And, unfortunately, there were some no-shows from a couple of my other guests that I was really looking forward to seeing there. And one of my future guests, we just didn't quite manage to cross paths during the weekend. But it was a great weekend and a great convention. And when it rolls around about this time next year, you might want to consider coming and checking it out. But I did realize it's been a while since I've given out my information for those of you who may not know all the ways to stay in touch with me. I just want to start off by mentioning again, my website is Heroes and Villains. That's all one word, spelled just like you think, heroesandvillains.libsyn.com. And just in case you don't know how to spell Libsyn, that's LIBSYN.com. On Twitter, you can find me. My handle is at HV Podcast. That's the letter H, the letter V, podcast. So at HV Podcast is where you can find me on Twitter. And, of course, there's nothing wrong with sending me an email. Just last week, I read you a wonderful email that I got from one of you awesome listeners. And if someone else would like to send me an email with either suggestions, comments, recommendations, or corrections, you can send that to laundryroombruce@gmail.com. That's laundryroombruce, all one word, spelled just like you think, @gmail.com. Don't forget, if you like the show, please, please, please subscribe on iTunes. And if you want to go above and beyond, don't just subscribe on iTunes. Please go leave me some sort of comments there, because the more comments that you leave, the easier it is for other people to find me. And, of course, if you're not into the whole iTunes and Apple thing, you can always find me on Stitcher. Now back to the show. Welcome back to episode 21 of Heroes and Villains with guest Eric Isaacson, discussing Dick Grayson, also known as Nightwing. And I want to start off with the origin story. And please, Eric, feel free to jump in anytime you want to. Is that okay?
Okay.
Well, I'm going to just sort of start in the beginning and say that Dick Grayson was the youngest in a family of Romanian acrobats that were known as the Flying Graysons. They performed with Haley Circus. And at one point, Dick Grayson managed to watch a mafia boss kill his parents in order to attempt to extort some money from Mr. Haley, the owner of the circus that employed them. It just so happens that Bruce Wayne was at this performance, and Bruce Wayne took young Richard Grayson under his wing, pun intended, in order to raise him as his own legal ward. Now, to start at the sort of give a little more color to this story, I just want to mention that while Dick Grayson and his family were preparing for the performance, the very, very young Dick Grayson managed to overhear a couple of gangsters that were attempting to get some money from Mr. Haley, and he refused, and the gangsters essentially sabotaged the trapeze wires with a little bit of acid. They poured some acid to weaken those wires. And during the next performance, the trapeze from which Dick Grayson's parents are swinging, well, it happened to snap, and it sent them to their deaths. And before Dick Grayson can go to the police because he actually witnessed this whole thing, Bruce Wayne changed into his Batman costume, and he stopped him from going to the police, and he said, listen, young man, if you go to the police, these gangsters that work for this guy named Tony Zuko, he owns the police, you'll never get anywhere other than to the nearest morgue. And he manages to keep him from sharing his knowledge as a material witness with the police for his own safety. Now, Batman helps him deal with the fact that his parents were murdered in cold blood before his own eyes by recounting Batman, or Bruce Wayne rather, his own experience watching his parents get murdered before him, which we all should be quite familiar with at this point. And Dick asks to become his aide, and he decides that he needs to train this young Richard Grayson. So I just want to insert mental images of your favorite 80s movie training montage here. So after what amounts to like 1 or 2 pages in the Golden Age comic books where things tended to happen quickly, Richard Grayson emerges as Robin. And Robin becomes the sort of prototypical sidekick for all superhero comics. During Richard's young years, his preteen and adolescent years, Batman and Robin are inseparable. There was a very, very long run of comics where you really did not see Batman without Robin, and that's when the whole dynamic duo moniker was developed. Now, in 1964, The Brave and the Bold, number 54, introduced this junior version of the Justice League of America, and this team was led by Robin, and this was sort of some foreshadowing to what would happen later with the Teen Titans. But this team was led by Robin, who was joined by 2 other sidekicks, Aqualad and Kid Flash, and they were tasked with stopping the menacing Mr. Twister. And, of course, they were successful. Do you know much about Mr. Twister?
Actually, I don't. I've read that story that you're referring to, and I think I've read a few other stories where he's appeared, but I don't know much about the character himself.
It sounds like something that people would have done to me in gym class, so it doesn't sound very good.
Yeah.
But later, these 3 sidekicks joined together with Speedy, which, of course, Speedy always confused me because that should have been Kid Flash's name. But anyway, Speedy, of course, is Green Arrow's sidekick, the young red-themed archer, and Wonder Girl, who has a very, very complicated relationship with Wonder Woman. And they had to free the JLA from the mind-controlled stupor they were in, which was mirrored very well in Young Justice later on. But later they decide to become a real team. They give themselves a name, and this is when the original Teen Titans run happened. And despite the later success that the Teen Titans enjoyed, that initial run didn't last very long. But, of course, that initial Teen Titans team decided that Robin, having served under Batman, the master strategist, the master tactician, the person who has a plan for every possible outcome, well, they picked Robin, Dick Grayson, as their leader. I'm not sure exactly where this fits into the continuity officially, but I do know that at some point Dick Grayson attended Hudson University in order to sort of separate him from Bruce Wayne and make him his own character a little bit. As Richard grows a little bit older, he starts to spend more time as leader of the Teen Titans. He eventually decides that he's not going to be Robin anymore, and he takes on the identity that we all know and love, and really the reason that we're having this episode, and he takes on the identity of Nightwing. Do you have any comments about that emergence from Robin to Nightwing?
Only that, like I said, he was coming into his own and coming out of the shadow of the Batman, and it was during the arc in the New Titans title, the Judas Contract, which is an excellent story, and
Yes.
that's when he
Awesome
first donned the
story.
costume.
And yeah, I'm glad you brought up that storyline because that's a great one, and I recommend that people check that one out. But I think that it really, really struck a chord with young adults of a certain age. Probably it hit home a little bit more with males than females. But that age where you start to realize you need to be your own person, but you're not sure who that own person is yet. And he picks this new identity, but it's inspired by someone else. So it sort of has the conflicting, the conflicting values of I want to be my own person, but I also want to pay homage to those who came before me. And I really think that struck a chord with, like I said, people of a certain age.
Yes, and just to add to that, Bruce, I don't know what they're doing now with the New 52 version of Nightwing, but one of the things I really enjoyed about the Nightwing from that Tales of the Teen Titans issue was Dick Grayson's thinking on why he wanted to have another identity and the blending of all of the influences. And one of the influences that he listed was Superman, because before the crisis happened in DC lore, Batman and Superman. Well, that too, but just in terms of Batman and Superman in the DC universe being friends and going on all these adventures, and Robin was part of that. Dick Grayson decided that he would take on the name of Nightwing, which was Superman's alternate identity in the bottled city of Kandor.
And in the grand, and just to, by the way, we'll mention it a little bit more in influences, but Jimmy Olsen filled the Robin role in those stories. Firebird, I think it was, but
Flamebird, I believe it was Flamebird.
I think you're right, Flamebird. But Dick Grayson didn't spend a lot of time in the grand scheme of things. I mean, when you think he was Robin from 1940 to 1984, 44 years as Robin, by 1994 he's already being asked to pick up the torch of his mentor and to become Batman. Do you want to mention anything about when that first happened to Dick Grayson, when he first had to try to carry the heavy load that comes with that cowl?
Yeah, are you referring to the Prodigal storyline?
That's what my notes say I'm referring to. So go ahead.
Actually, I'll have to defer to you, Bruce, because while I have those issues, I actually have not read that run of the story.
Well, we'll talk more about where the Nightfall, the influence of the Nightfall storyline a little bit later, but the Prodigal story arc follows directly after the Nightfall, which some people who haven't even read the comics may be familiar with. I won't go into any more detail than that. But in Nightfall, Bane breaks Bruce Wayne's back, and while Bruce Wayne is recovering from this broken back and he can't perform his duties as Batman, he needs someone to help. And he actually asks Dick Grayson to become Batman. And, of course, Dick Grayson is very, very hesitant because that is a very heavy load to carry on your shoulders. But eventually he does agree to serve as Batman for a time. That doesn't really last all that long because Batman does return from that. But then we later on reach the events that are 2009, I think, the Battle for the Cowl. Are you familiar with that storyline?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I don't know how much I can add to that, other than this. I believe this was after Bruce Wayne was thought dead, and when he was actually lost in time, and all these other characters were popping up as Batman, or it appeared that they were, while Dick Grayson struggled with taking on his mentor's role again as Batman, and in some ways, I think some people, namely Alfred, was kind of pushing him into it, and he resisted heavily. But in the end, I believe Dick Grayson decided that in order to better honor his mentor and to help basically save Gotham, he had to take on the cowl again.
And you're right. We had all these characters popping up as Batman, and one thing I forgot to mention in the Prodigal Son story arc is that I told you that Dick Grayson was the third Batman. The second Batman was actually John Paul Valley, who didn't do such a great job, and that's why Bruce Wayne really wanted Dick to take over the Batman role. But when it comes to the Battle for the Cowl, I don't want to spoil the story too much because I think that there are a lot of people who probably haven't read this. It is available in a trade paperback that's still in print as far as I know, and it's worth reading. But I'll just say that in the Battle for the Cowl, Dick Grayson does show that with the exception of Damian, he is the best Robin suited to be Batman. I guess the next thing I'll say is that Flashpoint happened, and Flashpoint resulted in the New 52, and when the New 52 occurred, Dick Grayson's reset button had been hit, and he was once again Nightwing. You have anything to contribute to, like, story arcs or character biography of Nightwing before I move on to the affiliates?
Only that that time after Dick Grayson became Batman, there was that run of Batman and Robin where Dick Grayson was taking care of Damian and training him, and that was a really good run, and it really showed the potential of what Dick Grayson as Batman could be.
And Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely were the creators on that most iconic run of Batman and Robin, where the roles were Dick Grayson as Batman and Damian Wayne as Robin. And Grant Morrison made it pretty clear from the beginning that his intention was to flip those roles, where all of a sudden Batman was the optimist, the lighter character, and Robin was very, very dark and disturbed. So I think that's awesome. I love that whole run. I love that dichotomy. And without saying too much more, Batman Incorporated number 8 really disappointed me to a degree, because I just wanted the New 52 to pick up, at least at some point, that same story arc that I got to enjoy from Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely's Batman and Robin run. Mm-hmm. Every superhero has to have some help from time to time, and oftentimes they're best defined by their affiliates. And I guess there's a pretty obvious affiliate that we should mention with Dick Grayson, Nightwing, and that would be Batman.
Yes.
But he's had several love interests along the way. Many of them have been superheroes in their own right. Can you think of any of the other DC characters that perhaps Dick Grayson had some romantic interest or romantic relationship with?
Well, let's see. There's been a couple really primary ladies that in his life. The first of which is Barbara Gordon, Batgirl.
Absolutely, and it's like a match either made in heaven or made in Gotham, depending on how you look at it. But Batgirl and Robin, if it were a 1980s made-for-TV movie, it would have to happen. Young love.
Yes, very true, very true. And then follow that up with Dick Grayson's relationship with Coriander or Starfire in the New Teen Titans.
Yes, and they nearly got married. I mean, they were on the verge of marriage, and I'm not sure what messed that relationship up, but they got pretty serious.
Mm-hmm.
At least serious in comic book terms.
Yes, very true.
Donna Troy. Are you familiar with Donna Troy?
Yes. And
they had they sort of grew up together. I think that's more of a brother-sister relationship, but it's still a strong relationship when we're talking about affiliates.
Yeah. And although I have to admit, Bruce, I was one of those. As I was reading New Teen Titans growing up, I was always wanting Dick Grayson and Donna Troy to get together.
And they have said more than once that they've expressed that they love each other, but it really, to many readers, comes across, like I said, as best friends or brother and sister. But writers and readers are not always as sophisticated as they should be, and I think that there are plenty of people who picture that as a more romantic relationship.
Yeah.
Now, these characters that we talked about lead to the broader grouping of affiliates. Of course, the Teen Titans was sort of the genesis of Nightwing. That's when he realized he needed to not just be Robin anymore and to have his own identity. And I mean the Teen Titans in all of its incarnations, the Teen Titans, the New Teen Titans, and simply the Titans. Of course, as far as the New 52 version of the Teen Titans, I'm not sure that there's any reference to Dick Grayson ever having been a member, but I'll have to check my sources on that. Nightwing was a member of the Outsiders. Do you want to say anything about the Outsiders?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was just thinking about that as you were talking. So he became a member of the Outsiders after the graduation day event where Donna Troy had been killed, at least temporarily. This is comics, so no death ever lasts that long. But he decided that he would approach going after the villains in a different way, and the Outsiders was that avenue for him to do that.
And, we had mentioned before that he had a close relationship with Damian. I would say other than Bruce, he's the only member of the Bat family to really have any kind of meaningful relationship with Damian. Dick Grayson has a pretty good relationship with most of the Bat family. I don't know that anyone understands where they stand with Jason Todd, but other than that, I think At one point, Tim Drake wanted to be Robin, and Dick Grayson told Tim Drake, I see you as an equal. You can't be Robin, and that's where Red Robin came from, and that's when Damian got his chance to serve as Robin. And any other affiliates you want to mention before we move on to the bad guys?
Sure. I just want to mention during the time that Dick Grayson was Batman, he was the basically the leader of the Justice League of America at that time, where he was teamed up with his former Teen Titans teammates Donna Troy and Cyborg for a while as well. So it was kind of a nice Teen Titans reunion, but in the Justice League. So that was an interesting storyline as well.
That was one heck of a storyline, which gave us a little foreshadowing to Cyborg's membership in the New 52 Justice League.
Good point.
When we talk about enemies, the first person I want to mention, of course, is Tony Zucco, whom I mentioned before was the mafia boss that managed to have the hit put out on the Flying Graysons. And as a result, he's always going to be one of those villains that are going to show up anytime there's a reboot or a reset button. And Dick Grayson's always going to be obsessed with Tony Zucco, sort of the way that Batman has been obsessed with Joe Chill and the various versions of his parents' killers over the years. I think it's also fair to say that any of the enemies of Batman, which is a very, very long rogues gallery that we shouldn't have to bark them all out, but these enemies of Batman are also enemies of Dick Grayson, Robin, Nightwing, because they know that that's one way to get to Batman. They don't always know the ways to get to Bruce Wayne. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they always know that they can get to Batman via Nightwing or Robin. Deathstroke, we're going to move on to some Teen Titans enemies. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Deathstroke? He's one of my favorite characters in the DC universe.
Okay, Deathstroke. Wow. So yeah, I believe he first appeared in New Teen Titans #2. I'd have to check that, but yeah, he was basically a super soldier. He was given a serum, I believe, and it increased his abilities, and he eventually became a mercenary. And one of his contracts was basically to take out the New Teen Titans. And his son, actually, I have to back up a little bit. His son actually took the contract and ended up dying in that issue. And then he, of course, took that contract. And then there was a long history of Deathstroke coming into the New Teen Titans and battling them. And then actually, for a time, they teamed up. They were on the same side. So it was
just like pro wrestling, when your arch rival becomes your tag team partner.
That's right. Yeah. So it was an interesting arc to see Deathstroke the Terminator go from this mercenary killer to basically to sort of a hero alongside the Titans.
And, Deathstroke has sort of this iconic appearance of having an eye patch. He has one good eye and this eye patch over what we must assume is either a bad or missing eye. And I think there's a pretty classic illustration once of a battle that Deathstroke had with Dick Grayson where Nightwing basically, I don't know if it was an arrow, there was some sort of sharp object that he just drove into the bad eye. He spared the good eye, but he sent the message to Deathstroke that had he so chosen, Deathstroke would never see again.
Yeah.
Any more classic Teen Titans villains or any enemies of Dick Grayson or Nightwing you want to mention before I move on to the New 52?
Oh boy.
You can throw anything
Titans.
You want out there.
Okay, so Titans, the obvious one is Trigon, the Terrible, from early on in the New Teen Titans run, which is Raven's father. And let's see, as far as, well, I'm going to step back just a bit, if you don't mind, Bruce, with Robin, enemies of Robin. There were two major ones that come to mind. There was Two-Face, who seemed to have a particular dislike for our acrobatic hero. For various reasons, but Two-Face always seemed to go after Robin whenever he could. And then there was also Crazy Quilt, who in many ways was more a Robin villain than a Batman villain, which I always found very interesting.
Yes.
And then finally, I'll just mention during the Nightwing 1995 series, Blockbuster was a major villain in Dick Grayson's life when he moved to Bloodhaven.
Oh, Bloodhaven's a whole nother storyline. If we're going to mention Bloodhaven, let's just throw Chemo in there.
Oh, very true.
Now, you told me that you haven't read much of the Nightwing and the New 52. Is that correct?
No, actually, I have. I've been
Okay.
collecting it and reading it since it
I knew you'd been
restarted.
collecting. I just wasn't sure if you'd read it because I don't mind spoiling things for the listeners, but if you spoil things for a co-host, then you're really doing some bad stuff. But I want to talk a little bit about Psycho, Saiko.
Hmm.
Psycho is this childhood acquaintance of Dick Grayson who, for some reason, is dead set on causing great harm to Dick Grayson. And in the early, I'd say the first 12 episodes, the first 12 issues, at least in the New 52, when the Court of Owls is being set up, we find out that Psycho is forced to fulfill some duties that Dick Grayson was spared, and that's why Psycho has this strong, strong disdain for Dick Grayson. Also, there's a character I just wanted to point out named Acheron, 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 who's this rhyming demon that battled Dick Grayson one episode. And I just kind of wanted to point him out because my last episode was on Conan the Barbarian, where I talked a lot about the religious cult of Acheron, and then I saw this name pop up again, and I just wanted to point out that Acheron is a Greek river that the ancient Greeks referred to as the River of Pain, and it was depicted as that river that separated the upper world from the underworld. And I always thought that was the River Styx, but the River Styx is completely contained in the underworld. So anytime you see those great Greek classic movies where you give this grim looking boatman some money to take you across a river, that's actually the Acheron River, and this demon, of course, lost when he fought against Nightwing. And I already said the Court of Owls, so that means that the Talons, in some form, shape, or other, and there are some people out there who still haven't read that, so I'm not going to comment on that anymore, but the Talons are enemies of Dick Grayson in the New 52. You want to mention anything else in the most recent Nightwing comics that I might not have mentioned?
I think the current storyline has Nightwing going up against the new prankster.
Yes.
But there's not much to say about that yet, because the story is just getting started.
So we'll find out. And death of the family. Of course, Dick Grayson was involved in that overarching story, and if you haven't read it, it's worth it. Now, multimedia. This is one of my favorite parts of the show, where I get to talk about all the crazy depictions that have occurred in various forms of our heroes outside of comic books. And I'm going to just run down some stuff. Some's obscure, some's less obscure. Feel free to jump in and add anything, because this list is probably not comprehensive. Also, feel free to comment on anything I mentioned that you're familiar with. But we're going to start off going all the way back to 1943 in these very, very campy serials where Batman was just this rich playboy who, even as Batman, sort of seemed like a Nancy boy. And Douglas Croft portrayed Robin in that old 1943 serial. 6 years later, there was a new serial in 1949, of course, and an actor named Johnny Duncan played Dick Grayson, Robin, in those serials. Now, I already mentioned Burt Ward, and when you come to, or at least if you ask me about live-action depictions of Dick Grayson, my brain goes straight to Burt Ward, and it's, holy flashback, Batman, we're talking about 1966. But that's still so ingrained in my young, impressionable mind. And, despite the fact that Burt Ward was like 45 years old and still playing this teenage sidekick when the Legends of the Superheroes came out, which isn't worth watching in my opinion, but some people will check it out due to curiosity. I still just think of Burt Ward, and not this most recent Free Comic Book Day, but last year there was a Blue Malibu comic called Burt Ward Boy Wonder, and I had to make sure I got that. I just couldn't help whether it was a good comic or not. I had to get the Burt Ward comic book. I'm going to jump ahead by about 40 years here, and on October 1st, 2008, the CW announced that they were going to come up with a live-action television series called The Graysons, which would follow the circus life of the Flying Graysons, of course, including Dick Grayson. But the pilot never got made. This television show never came to fruition. Maybe it will eventually with the recent success of Arrow. I don't know. The main reason it was canceled wasn't that it wasn't a good show, but they realized we're going to go down this Christopher Nolan movie version of Batman, and we don't need a lighthearted Grayson's circus show on at the same time. Dick Grayson, Robin, was portrayed by Chris O'Donnell, so famously in those Joel Schumacher Batman films. I'm sure you've seen Batman Forever and Batman and Robin.
Unfortunately, yes.
Do you have any comments on Chris O'Donnell's performance or that depiction of Dick Grayson?
Um, Only to say that I think that his performance as Robin in those movies was probably the highlight for me, at least, of those movies. He was cocky, he was young, but uh, he had the desire to enact justice, and I think he fit the role or the idea of Robin very well in those movies.
And a lot of people, myself included. I mean, I looked up some still frames and a few clips from the movie in preparation for this episode. But if you look at the sequel, Batman and Robin, that was released in 1997, you will notice that his costume changes from Batman Forever, and that he has that red V motif on a black costume. So it is a Nightwing costume, if you look closely.
Yeah.
The only difference is he has a cape, which Nightwing usually forgoes the cape in favor of occasionally some glider things in his armpits, but never the full-on cape. But that really impressed me because, Nightwing was not a character in 1997 that was definitely recognized by the masses. And Joel Schumacher, who I was convinced had never read a comic book, actually made a good choice there.
Yeah.
Nightwing has been in many animated television shows released by Warner Brothers. The first appearance that I could find, and I'm not saying that this is absolute, but the first appearance I could find of Nightwing was in the Batman animated series, not to be confused with Batman the animated series. Do you follow me? There was Batman, and then there was the Batman. But anyway,
Yes.
Jerry O'Connell of Stand By Me fame actually did the voice for Nightwing in the Batman animated series, and then I just couldn't help but notice that it went from O'Donnell to O'Connell, and I wondered if there's this Irish motif showing up in Nightwing portrayals.
Good point.
Robin is depicted, well, I'll say Dick Grayson, is depicted as the principal character in this very, very widely viewed fan film called Grayson, which is really a trailer. It's not a film. It was produced in 2004, and it was self-produced. A guy put about $18,000 of his own money into the production of like a 3-minute trailer, hoping that it would get him the job that later went to Christopher Nolan. But it's interesting to watch. You just go to YouTube, type in Grayson, just capital Grayson, and
Yeah, that's an excellent trailer. I watched that many times. It's too bad they couldn't have done something along those lines.
Here's what I say about the trailer. There was excellent writing. I mean, they had a great story to be suggested. They had good costumes. They had good blocking. They had good cinematography. But, I think they spent a lot of their budget on the technical aspects and the acting. The director plays Dick Grayson, I think, and he's a director, not an actor. And, it starts to be a little reminiscent of Batman 1966 and some of the acting, which I enjoyed totally. But when you think that he's looking to be the guy that directed Batman Begins, there's a big leap from that trailer to Batman Begins. But the story of Batman, mysteriously disappears. It sounds a lot like, this guy knows his comic book canon, and then Dick Grayson doesn't trust anyone. Dick Grayson happens to be married to Barbara Gordon in this trailer. I mean, you could probably write a 12-issue miniseries based on what's given to you in this like 3 or 4 minute trailer. So I think people should watch it. And there's this whole dynamic of Barbara Gordon and Dick Grayson have a daughter, and Dick Grayson promised to give up the costume. The director decided to have him as Robin instead of Nightwing because it had a little bit more mass appeal, but I could just see this working so well as a Nightwing story. There's another episode of The Brave and the Bold, well, not another episode, an episode of Batman, The Brave and the Bold, where Robin becomes Nightwing, and it's really cool to watch. You can get on YouTube and at least see the clip, even if you can't see the whole episode. And I think that The Brave and the Bold is still available on Netflix. I know it was for a while. And there's this episode called Sidekicks Assemble where sort of the quick version of the Teen Titans ascension of Robin into Nightwing occurs. And I love The Brave and the Bold, and I love this episode. Have you seen it?
Oh, yes.
Do you agree with me? I mean, it's just a nice, tidy ascension story.
Yeah. It's a good one.
And you've seen Under the Red Hood, I'm sure. I mean, most people.
Oh, yes.
And I love it because the actor choice, the voice actor, is Neil Patrick Harris, someone I'm a big fan of. I was a Doogie Howser fan when I was in high school or younger even, and I've always followed him. through all of his various roles. And I like the choice of Neil Patrick Harris for Dick Grayson. He has a lot of range, particularly in his voice, and he plays Nightwing, who sort of drops in to help out with the Mazo, I think it is, that Batman's fighting. And it helps, I guess, expose more people to Nightwing, because there are a fair number of non-comic book fans who've seen Under the Red Hood. Dick Grayson appears in Young Justice. Do you follow Young Justice at all, or at least a little bit?
Oh, I watched every episode.
So Dick Grayson was Robin in the first season. And then in the second season, which they called Young Justice Invasion, Nightwing makes a very, very dramatic appearance. I think there are a lot of people who have not yet seen Young Justice Invasion, so I don't want to give the details about how Dick Grayson appears in the first episode of that season of Young Justice. But would you agree that it's very dramatic and it sort of surprises you when it happens?
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
It leads you down one path and it brings you home on another.
Yes.
Now, The Dark Knight Rises. The Dark Knight Rises came out last summer. Nearly everyone on Earth has seen it. The Avengers is maybe the only more watched comic book movie ever. The Dark Knight Rises was in the news for some unfortunate reasons, but I think it's okay for us to discuss spoilers with The Dark Knight Rises at this point. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
So, I mean, in The Dark Knight Rises, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character emerges at the end as some sort of successor for Batman. How do you picture that character?
In terms of,
and I'm talking about John Blake. I guess at the end, I mean, they call him Robin at one point, but I just have always visualized him as going straight to, I'm sorry, Nightwing.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there. Even though they went the Robin route, because as you've said a few times now, the mass appeal of Robin over Nightwing is obvious. But yeah, I don't think it would make any sense for Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character in that movie to become Robin. Nightwing definitely would fit within the tone of the movie and everything that whole trilogy of films represents.
And even at the end, when he has sort of that dramatic scene where he discovers the Batcave, he's wearing his spelunking gear, which to some degree is reminiscent of a modern Nightwing uniform or outfit. Now, there's something that I didn't see myself, but when you read posts on the internet, you can go back and see it later, particularly if you have the DVD or the Blu-ray, and you can go frame by frame. But there's that scene where there are the civilians on the bridge, and John Blake is trying to save those civilians, and he pulls out a badge. And if you look closely at the badge that he pulls out, in the center of the shield is that kind of classic Nightwing bird.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so I take that. I don't know if that was added by Nolan. I don't know if that was added by the production designer. I don't know if that was added by Warner Brothers or maybe some of the various consultants that are going to work on a comic book movie, whether they're credited or not. But I thought that was a nice touch to make it clear that the maturity of Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I mean, he's beyond the Robin stage. He's definitely Nightwing. Now, the last thing that I'm going to add under the multimedia section, I found out that there were a couple of BBC radio plays, which for very geeky and nerdy reasons of my own, I'm a huge fan of that medium. I love radio plays. I love listening to the old Westerns. I love listening to The Shadow, things like that. And I found out that a voice actor named James Good provided the voice for Dick Grayson as Nightwing in a 1989 BBC radio play, Batman: The Lazarus Syndrome. And then again in 1994, they did a version of Nightfall where the same actor portrayed Dick Grayson, Nightwing, and ultimately Batman. So I've got to find out how I can listen to those. I've never heard them, but I'm on a mission now to find those.
Yeah, I just took a note for those titles, so I can look them up too.
Yes. Anything else in multimedia before we start talking about influences?
Did you mention the Teen Titans animated series?
You know what? I did not at all, and that's probably because I started to get into Nightwing mode, and that's more of a Robin. But why don't you tell us about those two primary series?
So Teen Titans was an animated series on Cartoon Network several years ago, and you had Robin joining with Beast Boy, Cyborg, Raven, and Starfire. And it was, I think, more geared towards younger viewers. It definitely had
the animation, the writing, the humor. I mean, it was definitely, at least, if it was not intended for younger viewers, it was intended to be sort of on a meta level in that form.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely had an anime.
Yes, that's the word I was looking
influence, but I will say it, despite some of the deficiencies of the show, that I at least that's how I felt about it. It turned into a very strong Dick Grayson focused, at least on several episodes towards the end of the show. Dick Grayson was featured very prominently in the storyline, so that's why I tend to think of it in a positive light.
Yes.
Going forward, and then they did just recently came out with the Teen Titans Go, which is the same people portraying the characters in the Teen Titans animated series. So they're reprising their roles in that, but the animation's done a little differently with the characters being kind of, I don't know how to describe it, squished and just smaller in stature, I guess.
And was that maybe based on some of those shorts that they were showing between the Green Lantern animated series and Young Justice for a while?
Exactly, yeah.
That's what I thought. And I guess what I would add to the Teen Titans, particularly this newest Teen Titans Go, I don't know if you're familiar with HeroClix, the tabletop game, but I had some HeroClix things down in my basement where I normally record, not where I'm recording now, but my son actually broke my Beast Boy HeroClix, and I thought in order to make him understand the severity of what he had done, I would let him watch some Teen Titans Go and some old Teen Titans if I could find them, so that maybe he would get some empathy with Beast Boy and understand it was not nice to break off a pterodactyl's wing. Influences. Go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing.
Yes.
Since we're talking about Nightwing, I think, and you already mentioned this, but Batman Under the Red Hood, that animated movie, that's probably one of the best, besides perhaps Young Justice, the best inclusion of Nightwing in anything in other media outside of comics. So
Yes.
if anyone hasn't seen that, I highly recommend it. It's an excellent story, and featuring Batman, Nightwing, and the Red Hood.
And I did find one clip that I really like too. It's on YouTube. It's like a 3-minute clip, and I think it's from the Batman animated series. Once again, not to be confused with Batman the animated series, but there's this scene where Batman's in some hot water. Barbara Gordon as Oracle is typing away on her computer, and she says, "Robin, he needs your help now." And then it flashes to Nightwing, and he says, "In case you didn't know, I haven't been called Robin in over a decade." And it sort of gets everybody up to speed yet. I'm assuming it was Dick Grayson's first appearance in that show, but it's a neat clip you can find on YouTube. Influences. And when I say influences, I'm talking about either characters that influenced our character of the week, or perhaps some characters that were influenced by our character of the week. And we don't have to limit ourselves to comic book characters. We can explore anything we want to. The world of literature, movies, history, Greek mythology, as I've done before. And if it's okay with you, I want to start off by what a guy named Don Markestein from Tunapedia, I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, but he describes the very first comic book type sidekick, because I thought it was Dick Grayson. But it turns out there's a guy named Little Beaver who was a sidekick for Red Ryder, who debuted in 1938. And he's a child who's a Native American and serves as sort of a proto-Tonto for Red Ryder, who's kind of a proto-Lone Ranger. I'm not that familiar with the Red Ryder stories. I don't know if you are or not.
I'm not.
But apparently the first comic book or comic strip sidekick was Little Beaver, who was soon replaced by Dick Grayson in Batman. And, of course, Batman has to be a heavy influence on Dick Grayson. You look at the origin story. He watches his parents get murdered in front of him. That causes him to hate crime. And he is mentored by Batman, so there's no way that you can avoid saying that Batman was an influence on Robin. Also, the initial creators, going back to Bill Finger and Bob Kane, and particularly Bill Finger, they admit that Robin the Boy Wonder, that name and the way that he looked originally, that sort of medieval look, was heavily, heavily inspired by depictions of Robin Hood at the time. He's not only called Robin, but he sort of has a Robin Hood-esque costume with a cape added to it. You know, he had those pointy slippers like Peter Pan would wear for a while. I'm not sure what those things are called. Nightwing and Flamebird we talked about. Now we're moving on to some Nightwing influences, but we discussed that Nightwing and Flamebird are these Kryptonian heroes who've been depicted in a couple of different ways. I think you mentioned that at first it was Superman and Jimmy Olsen using alter egos, and then there was sort of a retcon where they were actual Kryptonian heroes. Anything else about Nightwing and Flamebird?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, because there's a whole lot that goes on there that gets tricky to follow. But there's a point made that Nightwing was the Kryptonian Batman, regardless of who was filling the role, and Flamebird was the Kryptonian Robin, regardless of who was filling the role. Now, when it comes to influences on Robin, I also just wanted to mention, or Dick Grayson rather, but I also wanted to mention Jimmy Olsen because he was probably the first sidekick in the modern DC stories, but he was not really a crime-fighting sidekick. He was just sort of a groupie or a hanger-on. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
And I know in some later depictions, Jimmy Olsen became more involved in crime fighting, and Jimmy Olsen even had his own ongoing series for a while. But I think that there's probably some degree of influence with Jimmy Olsen because just the fact that everything that happened with Batman and Robin happened so soon after Superman and Jimmy Olsen became popular. And then you go to the Marvel family. And when I say Marvel family, I mean Captain Marvel from the old comics, not the current Marvel comics. Shazam, as many people know him better, but we've got all these children suddenly popping up. I mean, he practically ran his own orphanage at one point. There's a character that was created by Eisner, actually. There was a character created by Eisner known as Wonder Boy, not to be confused with the Boy Wonder. But the Boy Wonder, of course, Dick Grayson Robin, did come before Wonder Boy. And Eisner created a character known as Wonder Man, who was decided to be too similar to Superman. So Eisner changed him to Wonder Boy, and then I think shortly after that, Superboy showed up. And there's a guy named Dusty the Boy Detective. I don't know anything else about him. He's a sidekick, and he's a detective, and Batman is the world's greatest detective, and Dick Grayson was his sidekick. I doubt that you know anything about Dusty the Boy Detective.
I do not.
But you do know...
You're getting into the minutia of comic book history now.
But you do know about Bucky.
Of course.
Tell me a little bit about who Bucky is.
Bucky Barnes. So he was the essentially the sidekick to Captain America.
Yes, exactly. And Bucky did come around after Robin the Boy Wonder had made his presence known, and I think that there was a pretty clear influence on Bucky from the success of the whole dynamic that Batman and Robin had. Now, there is no question at all that Speedy, you could go so far as to say Speedy wasn't just influenced by Dick Grayson, but that Speedy's so-called creator may have tried to just make Dick Grayson wear a different costume.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the most clear analog I can think of as far as obvious influences. And I would just go to say that pretty much all the sidekicks, other than that little beaver guy I mentioned, pretty much all the sidekicks in superhero history have at least a small debt of gratitude to Dick Grayson Robin.
Definitely.
Now, I want to discuss Boston Brand as someone who might have been influenced by Dick Grayson.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure you catch my drift there.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell us about it?
Well, Boston Brand is, of course, best known as Dead Man. But I think the influence you're going for is that Boston was an aerial performer in a circus.
Yeah, he was an acrobat, more or less.
Yeah, and he became Dead Man when someone at one of his performances decided to take him out.
Yeah, so, this is more than, it is. It's more than 20 years. We're actually encroaching on 30 years after Dick Grayson watches his family die on the high wire, or on the trapeze, rather, that Boston Brand goes through something similar. However, the twist is Boston Brand is a victim, and he finds his own way back to wander the earth as Dead Man. And, if we're going to talk about influences, I know I'm getting a little sidetracked, but Dead Man in that red costume with that white D on his chest, does that remind you of anyone that might have come around about 4 years earlier? Daredevil. I just can't help it. I see that Daredevil influence anytime I look at Boston Brand. I don't know if you know this or not, but in New England, there's a Six Flags that actually has a roller coaster that's called the Nightwing Ride. And it has a picture of Nightwing up on the front of the roller coaster. And I don't know if it's still in operation or not, but I'd kind of like to go ride that. I saw a picture of it.
Me
So
too.
I guess that's one roller coaster that was influenced by Dick Grayson. Anything else you want to add under influences?
I will add. You already mentioned that that Robin basically influenced entire generations of teen sidekicks throughout comics, not just DC Comics. But
Yes.
I also just wanted to mention too, um, uh, Dick Grayson I think has influenced quite a lot of DC characters in that Dick Grayson is well beloved by many characters in the DC universe. So much to the point there was an issue of Brave and the Bold just a few years ago where Dick Grayson basically told a bunch of heroes, mostly Justice Leaguers, that they had to go to this other dimension or outer space. I can't remember the exact details of the story, but he did it in order to save them, and the comment in the story, I think it was Green Arrow that was in that story, was that only Dick Grayson could pull that off because he has so many ties to so many different people in the DC universe, which I think is unparalleled in the DC universe.
And with the recent Damian Wayne events, we've seen a lot of people pay their respects to him. But I don't know if you know this, in one of the crises, and I'm at a loss for exactly which crises it was, but in one of the crisis storylines, originally the editorial plan was to kill Dick Grayson. And I just couldn't even imagine the sort of outpouring, the sort of homages that would have been paid to Dick Grayson had he died. But at some point they decided that was not a good thing to do, and that kind of got scrapped. But could you imagine the repercussions that something like that would have?
Well, I can imagine the repercussions on Dan DiDio, who is the one who wanted to kill off Dick Grayson.
Yes. Well, this is the time in the show where we recommend some things to the listeners. We recommend, I don't care if it's comics, if it's prose, I don't care what it is. We recommend some things to folks if they want to get to know this character better, if they want to explore this character. And I'll let you go first.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I already mentioned the Batman Under the Red Hood animated movie.
Excellent.
So I'll just point that out as well. Young Justice. Let's see. As far as print, I would recommend the following things. There are the New Teen Titans buses, omnibi. I think it's buses. The third volume just came out recently, but you get that entire Marv Wolfman and George Perez run of the 80s New Teen Titans. Those are must reads in my book, definitely. And then you have, of course, the 1990 the mid 1990s Nightwing series itself, which I think lasted 12 years. I think it was.
Yeah.
That they did that. And then finally, I mentioned this before, but the Batman and Robin series by Grant Morrison
I could not recommend that enough. I could not recommend that enough.
If you're a Dick Grayson fan, and of course,
and
a Damian Wayne fan
too, yeah. So
yeah,
I might be recommending that more for Grant Morrison and Damian Wayne, but it doesn't really matter why I'm recommending it. I agree.
Yeah. What else do you have?
Well, I have The Battle for the Cowl. It's available, as I said, in a trade paperback, and it's just awesome. For a guy who's a fan of the Robins and the succession of Robins, and just to see how unique each of them is, how they each have their own personality, and Robin is a moniker, but they are so different from one Robin to the next. You get to just see it all play out in Battle for the Cowl, Damian included. Also, as I said before, The Dark Knight Rises, I see that as the best, if not only legitimate Nightwing live-action depiction that we have available. And I love live-action depictions of superheroes. And also, I'm going to do something I don't know if this is the first time I've done it, but I haven't done it very often. I'm recommending a specific episode. I want to recommend episode 1 of season 2 of Young Justice, which is also known as Young Justice Invasion. And that's, I don't want to say too much. I'll just say that Dick Grayson appears fairly early on in that episode, and I loved it. I mean, I watch it again and again, and even though I know what happens, it still just clicks. Well, why don't you take a minute here and tell us once again about your podcast and your website and anything else you want us to know before we say goodnight.
All righty. Let's see. So the Long Box Review podcast is you can find that along with various blog posts that I do there at longboxreview.wordpress.com. The podcast is just a general comic book discussion podcast where me and sometimes Travis, my usual co-host, and a few other occasional co-hosts will come on, and we'll just talk about the news, do some reviews, and just basically talk the thing that we love the most, which is comics.
Well, I just want to tell you, thank you once again for being on the show. I've really enjoyed spending this time with you, and I hope, we can come up with some other folks we want to talk about sometime in the future, because I would love to have you on as a guest once again. This has been very pleasant for me, but I just want to tell everybody, as always, until next time, remember, heroes are super.